The homeless man froze to death behind the Goodwill on 72nd Street in Omaha, Nebraska, on a Thursday night in February 2019, and nobody knew his name until Detective Sarah Webb ran his fingerprints and the Pentagon called her within 20 minutes. Webb had been a cop for 16 years, worked homicide for 7, and she'd seen plenty of frozen bodies. Omaha winters killed people every year: the homeless, the addicts, the ones who fell through the cracks. This one looked like all the others at first. White male, maybe 70 years old, weathered face, dirty clothes, clutching a bottle of cheap vodka that had frozen solid in his hand. The store manager who found him said the guy had been sleeping in their dumpster enclosure for weeks. Name unknown. No ID. Just another John Doe who wouldn't make the news. Webb did what she always did with unidentified bodies. She took fingerprints, ran them through AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system, and waited for the computer to spit out a name and maybe a criminal history. Usually took a few hours. Sometimes the prints came back clean if the person had never been arrested or served in the military. This time her phone rang before she even made it back to her desk. "Detective Webb?" The voice was male, clipped, official. "This is Colonel Martin Chen calling from the Department of Defense, Personnel Records Division. You just ran a set of fingerprints through the system. Case number 2019-0247. Webb sat down slowly. In 16 years, she'd never gotten a call from the Pentagon. "Yes, sir. John Doe. Froze to death last night. I'm trying to identify him. The prints belong to Master Sergeant Thomas Arthur Brennan, U.S. Army, 1st Infantry Division. Serial number 372819554. He was reported AWOL in September 1972 and never located." There was a pause. "Detective, Sergeant Brennan was recommended for the Medal of Honor in 1945. The paperwork is still in our system. We've been looking for him for 47 years. Webb looked at the crime scene photos on her desk. The dead homeless man with his frozen vodka bottle and his dirt-caked fingernails. A Medal of Honor recipient. Are you sure it's the same person? The fingerprints are definitive. I'm sending you the file now. Detective Webb, this is a priority matter. The Secretary of the Army will want to be briefed." Chen's voice softened slightly. "Can you tell me? How did he die?" "He froze to death in a dumpster enclosure. Blood alcohol was probably through the roof, based on the bottle. No identification, no money, no family that we know of. The store manager said he'd been homeless for years, maybe decades." Webb pulled up her email, saw the file downloading. "Colonel, what the hell happened? How does a Medal of Honor nominee end up dying alone in Omaha? That's what we'd like to know, Detective. The last confirmed sighting of Sergeant Brennan was in 1972 at Fort Carson, Colorado. He walked off base one afternoon and never came back. We've had his file flagged ever since." Chen cleared his throat. "Read the citation, Detective, then call me back." Webb opened the file. The Medal of Honor recommendation was 74 years old, typed on a manual typewriter, signed by a lieutenant colonel named Harrison J. Mitchell. She started reading and forgot to breathe. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On 7 March 1945, Sergeant Thomas A. Brennan, Company B, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, 9th Armored Division, displayed extraordinary heroism during the capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, Germany. When the lead elements of the American advance reached the bridge and found it still intact, Sergeant Brennan volunteered to lead the first squad across, despite heavy enemy fire from both banks and the bridge towers. Under withering machine gun fire and mortar bombardment, Sergeant Brennan led his men across 1,100 feet of bridge span, neutralizing 3 enemy machine gun nests and personally killing 11 German soldiers. When German engineers attempted to detonate demolition charges that would have destroyed the bridge, Sergeant Brennan, at great personal risk, cut the wires to the explosives while under direct enemy fire. His actions secured the first intact bridge across the Rhine River, allowing Allied forces to establish a bridgehead on the eastern bank and accelerate the final defeat of Nazi Germany. Sergeant Brennan's extraordinary heroism and selfless dedication to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. The citation went on for another page. Webb sat back in her chair. This man, this frozen corpse behind a Goodwill in Omaha, had changed the course of World War II. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine it. March 7, 1945. The lead elements of the 9th Armored Division rolling toward the Rhine River, not expecting to find a bridge still standing. Every bridge for 100 miles had been blown by retreating Germans. But there it was, the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, massive twin towers on each bank, railroad spans stretching 1,100 feet across the gray water. Still intact. Brennan would have been 22 years old, 3 months of combat under his belt. He'd survived the Bulge, seen friends die in the snow at Bastogne. And now his lieutenant was asking for volunteers to go first, because German engineers were working frantically to blow the bridge, and someone had to stop them. Brennan stepped forward. She imagined him running across that bridge, machine gun fire tearing up the steel deck plates, mortar rounds exploding in the water below, the bridge shaking under his boots. German soldiers in the towers firing down on them, the smell of cordite and river water, the sound of men screaming. Brennan firing his M1 Garand, the distinctive 8-round ping as the clip ejected. Taking cover behind a twisted girder, his squad right behind him, trusting him to lead them through hell. And then finding the demolition wires, thick cables running along the underside of the bridge, all converging at the eastern tower. German engineers trying desperately to trigger the charges. Brennan pulling out his wire cutters, hands shaking from adrenaline, bullets ricocheting off metal inches from his head. 1 cut, 2, 3. The explosives dead now, harmless. The bridge was saved. Thousands of American soldiers would cross it in the next 10 days before it finally collapsed. The war would be shortened by weeks. Historians would call it the miracle of Remagen. And 2 days later, Brennan would kill 12 of his own men in the darkness. Webb opened her eyes. The Remagen Bridge was famous. She remembered it from high school history class. First Allied bridge across the Rhine. Shortened the war by weeks, maybe months. Saved thousands of lives. And the hero who made it possible had died drunk in a dumpster. Webb looked at the rest of the file. There was a photograph from 1945, a young soldier, maybe 23 years old, with dark hair and haunted eyes, standing ramrod straight in his Class A uniform. The photo was black and white, but Webb could see the strain in his face even across 7 decades. He looked like a man who'd seen too much. The service record was extensive. Thomas Arthur Brennan, born April 15, 1922, in Lincoln, Nebraska. Enlisted September 1942 after his brother was killed at Guadalcanal. Trained at Fort Benning, Georgia. Shipped to Europe in November 1944 as a replacement. Assigned to Company B, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, 9th Armored Division. Fought through the Battle of the Bulge. Promoted to sergeant after Bastogne. And then, on March 7, 1945, he led the first squad across the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, but the Medal of Honor was never awarded. Webb flipped through the pages, looking for an explanation. There, a memo dated April 1945. Classification, secret. Medal of Honor recommendation for Sergeant Brennan has been administratively suspended, pending investigation into friendly fire incident of 9 March 1945. 12 American casualties. Full report attached. Webb's hands were shaking as she opened the attached report. It was heavily redacted, whole paragraphs blacked out by censors, but the basic facts were clear enough. 2 days after the bridge was captured, American forces were still fighting to expand the bridgehead on the eastern bank. German counterattacks were constant and brutal. During one engagement on the night of March 9, Sergeant Brennan's squad encountered what they believed to be German infiltrators wearing captured American uniforms. This was a known German tactic. The Nazis had done it during the Battle of the Bulge, sending English-speaking soldiers in American uniforms behind the lines to cause confusion and sabotage. Brennan's squad opened fire. 12 men died. It was only afterward that they discovered the truth. The dead men were American prisoners of war who had escaped from a German transport and were trying to make it back to Allied lines. They'd been wearing whatever clothes they could find. Some had German jackets with American helmets. Some had mixed uniforms. In the darkness and confusion, Brennan had made a split-second decision. He'd been wrong. The report concluded, while Sergeant Brennan's actions on 7 March were undeniably heroic. The events of 9 March call into question his judgment and suitability for the nation's highest military honor. Recommendation: Medal of Honor nomination suspended indefinitely. Sergeant Brennan to receive Distinguished Service Cross instead. Matter to be kept classified to protect morale and avoid negative publicity. Webb closed the file. She understood now. Tom Brennan had saved the war effort by capturing the Remagen Bridge. 2 days later, he'd killed 12 of his own men by mistake. The Army had given him a lesser medal, buried the full story, and sent him home with orders never to talk about what really happened. And he'd spent the next 7 decades destroying himself with guilt. She needed to talk to someone who'd known him. Webb started with the basics. Checked census records, property records, marriage licenses. Found that Thomas Brennan had returned to Nebraska in 1946, married a woman named Dorothy Walsh in 1947, bought a house on the south side of Omaha in 1949. They'd had 2 children, Michael, born 1950, and Patricia, born 1952. Tom had worked as a machinist at the Omaha stockyards. Seemed like a normal life. And then it fell apart. Divorce in 1961. Dorothy cited emotional cruelty and excessive drinking. She got the house and the kids. Tom moved into a rented room downtown. Lost his job in 1965. Another job, another firing. By 1970, he was living in flop houses. In 1972, he'd apparently tried to get his life together, re-enlisted in the Army at age 50, which was unusual but not unheard of for veterans with his record. Made it 4 months at Fort Carson before he walked away from everything. After that, Thomas Brennan disappeared. Webb found scattered records suggesting he'd used the name John Miller on the streets. Common enough to be invisible, generic enough to avoid questions. He'd been arrested twice in Denver in the 1980s for public intoxication, both times giving that false name and a fake date of birth. The cops had fingerprinted him, but without the right name or DOB, the system never flagged him. He'd been careful, paranoid even, avoiding anything that might connect him back to his real identity. It was only in death, when Webb ran his prints with no name attached, that the system finally found Thomas Arthur Brennan. Webb found the daughter, Patricia, in Des Moines. She was 67 now, retired school teacher. Webb called her, explained who she was and why she was calling. "My father's dead?" Patricia's voice was flat. Not surprised, not particularly sad, just flat. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He passed away Thursday night. We've been trying to identify him. I haven't seen him since I was 9 years old. He just left. Mom told us he'd gone away and wasn't coming back. For years I thought he was dead. Then in my 20s I hired a private investigator, found out he was living on the streets in Denver. I tried to contact him once. He told me to leave him alone." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from me, Detective? I want to understand what happened to him. Your father was a war hero. He captured the Remagen Bridge. Did you know that? No. The word was sharp. He never talked about the war. Never. If you brought it up, he'd leave the room or start drinking. He had nightmares. I remember hearing him screaming at night when I was little. Mom would try to calm him down. Sometimes he'd be okay for weeks and then something would trigger him and he'd disappear for days, come home drunk. I was afraid of him, Detective. Not because he was violent, he never hit us, but because he was like a ghost. He'd look at you and it was like he wasn't really seeing you, like he was seeing something else. Did he ever mention Remagen or March 1945? No, wait, maybe once. I must have been 10 or 11. We were watching TV, some war movie. There was a scene with a bridge. Dad just stood up and walked out of the house. Didn't come back for 3 days. Mom found him passed out in his car. I remember her crying, saying something about how the war wouldn't let him go. But she never explained what she meant. Webb told Patricia about the Medal of Honor recommendation, about the bridge, about the classified file. She didn't mention the friendly fire incident. That was still technically classified. And anyway, Patricia had been through enough. So, he was a hero. Patricia's voice was thick with emotion now. All those years I thought he was just broken. Just a drunk who couldn't hold a job and abandoned his family. And he was carrying something like that. Yes, ma'am. What happens now? The Army wants to give him a military funeral with full honors. They're talking about finally awarding the Medal of Honor posthumously. Patricia laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. 74 years too late. That'll bring him back, won't it? She took a shaky breath. I'm sorry, Detective. I know you're just doing your job. But you have to understand, that man destroyed our family. Whatever happened to him in the war, whatever he did or saw, he let it destroy everything. My mother died alone in a nursing home in 1998. My brother Michael became an alcoholic too, died of liver failure in 2005. And I spent 50 years trying to figure out why my father didn't love us enough to stay. I think he did love you, Webb said quietly. I think that's why he left. Because he couldn't stand to let you see what he'd become. Maybe, but it doesn't change anything, does it? After the call, Webb sat in her office and thought about Tom Brennan. She tried to imagine what it must have been like, coming home from the war, trying to build a normal life, pretending to be okay. Going to work, coming home, eating dinner with the family. And every night, closing his eyes and seeing the faces of 12 men he'd killed. American soldiers. Men who'd survived German POW camps, escaped, almost made it home, and he'd shot them in the dark. The Army had kept it classified, probably told him never to speak of it, gave him a lesser medal and sent him on his way. What was he supposed to do with that? How was he supposed to live with knowing that his greatest moment, capturing the bridge, saving thousands of lives, was forever tainted by his worst mistake 2 days later? Webb pulled out the crime scene photos again, looked at Tom Brennan's face, 74 years older than the soldier in the Army photograph, weathered by decades on the streets, marked by alcoholism and exposure and guilt. But she could still see the resemblance. Same cheekbones. Same shape of the eyes. The eyes. Something about them made her stop. She pulled up the Army photo from 1945 on her computer screen, put it side by side with the crime scene photo, zoomed in on the eyes in both images. That's when it hit her. The same look. Even across 7 decades, even through all the pain and alcohol and homelessness, the eyes were the same. Haunted, distant, looking at something no one else could see. In the 1945 photo, he was already carrying it. You could see it if you looked close enough. The weight of what he'd done, what he would do. as if some part of him already knew what was coming 2 days later on March 9th. Webb felt something crack in her chest. She'd seen 1,000 crime scene photos, 1,000 dead bodies. But this one, this man who'd been both a hero and a killer, who'd saved thousands and destroyed 12, who'd carried that impossible weight for 74 years, this one broke through her professional detachment. She printed both photos, pinned them side by side on her evidence board. The soldier and the corpse. The same man, separated by a lifetime of guilt. She noticed something she'd missed before. Brennan's right hand, the one not holding the vodka bottle, was clenched in a fist. Webb zoomed in on the photo. There was something in his hand, something small and metallic. She called the morgue. "Did you catalog everything from the John Doe from Thursday night? The frozen guy from the Goodwill?" "Yeah, it's all bagged and logged. You need something?" He had something in his right hand. What was it? She heard papers rustling. Dog tags, military issue. Name says Thomas A. Brennan. Want me to send them over? Yeah, thanks. The dog tags arrived an hour later. Webb held them up to the light. They were so worn the lettering was barely visible. Tom Brennan had carried them for 74 years, through everything. The war, the marriage, the divorce, the descent into alcoholism, decades on the streets. He'd lost everything else, but he'd kept his dog tags. Webb called Colonel Chen back. "I've been looking into Brennan's life after the war. I think I understand why he went AWOL in 1972. Go on. He re-enlisted because he was trying one last time to be the person he was before the mistake. But it didn't work. You can't go back. So he walked away from everything. The army, his identity, his past. Became a ghost. And he stayed a ghost for 47 years until he finally froze to death in Omaha." Chen was quiet for a long moment. "The Secretary of the Army has decided to award the Medal of Honor posthumously. The friendly fire incident will remain classified, but the recommendation will be approved based on his actions on March 7, 1945. "That's good," Webb said. "But can I ask you something, Colonel? Why did you suspend the Medal of Honor in the first place? Why not just give it to him and keep the other thing quiet? Seems like you punished him twice, denied him the recognition he'd earned, but also made him carry the knowledge of what he'd done." "Detective, I wasn't there in 1945. I can't speak to what those officers were thinking. But I've read enough files like this to make an educated guess. They were worried about morale, worried about the narrative. The capture of Remagen was a huge morale boost. Newspapers called it the miracle of Remagen. Americans needed heroes in 1945. They needed to believe the war was just and winnable, and that our soldiers were righteous. A hero who makes a terrible mistake 2 days later. That complicates the story. It makes people question things. So they chose to simplify. Give him a lesser medal, bury the complication, keep the narrative clean, and destroy Brennan in the process. Yes, Chen sighed. War is full of impossible decisions, Detective. Brennan made one on the night of March 9, 1945. He saw what he thought were German infiltrators and made a split-second call that turned out to be wrong. The officers who suspended his Medal of Honor made a different kind of impossible decision. Choose between honoring a flawed hero or protecting a simple narrative. They chose the narrative. I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying I understand how it happened. What about the 12 men he killed? Who tells their families the truth? The families were told their loved ones died in combat, which is technically accurate. The specific circumstances remain classified. After 74 years, most of those families are probably gone. The few who remain, what good would it do to tell them now? Webb thought about Patricia in Des Moines, who'd spent her life thinking her father abandoned her because he didn't care. The truth always matters, Colonel. Even when it's ugly. Perhaps, but my orders are clear. The friendly fire incident remains classified. Brennan will be honored for his heroism at Remagen. That's the story that goes on the record. After Chen hung up, Webb sat in her office and thought about stories. The official story. Tom Brennan was a war hero who captured the Remagen Bridge and saved thousands of lives. He disappeared in 1972 and was finally found and honored. Clean, simple, heroic. The real story. Tom Brennan was a war hero who captured the Remagen Bridge and saved thousands of lives. 2 days later, he made a terrible mistake that killed 12 American soldiers. The Army denied him full recognition, classified the incident, and left him to deal with the guilt alone. He tried to build a normal life and failed. He destroyed his family. He became a drunk. He disappeared. He died alone in a dumpster in Omaha, clutching the dog tags he'd worn since 1942. Which story was true? Both of them. Neither of them. War made heroes and monsters out of the same people, sometimes on the same day. Tom Brennan had done something impossibly brave on March 7, 1945. He'd also done something unforgivably wrong on March 9. The Army wanted to honor the first and bury the second. But Brennan couldn't separate them. To him, they were the same story. The funeral was held on a cold March morning at Omaha National Cemetery, 74 years and 8 days after Brennan had crossed the Remagen Bridge. The Army went all out. Full military honors, flag-draped coffin, rifle salute, the works. A general flew in from Washington to present the Medal of Honor to Patricia, who accepted it with dry eyes and a set jaw. The general gave a speech about heroism and sacrifice and the greatest generation. He didn't mention alcoholism or homelessness or the 12 dead soldiers in Germany. Webb stood in the back watching. A few other people had shown up, some elderly veterans from local VFW posts, a couple of reporters, a few curiosity seekers. None of them had known Tom Brennan. They were there for the story, the official story, the simple one. After the ceremony, Patricia came over to Webb. She was holding the Medal of Honor in its presentation case. They gave me this like it makes up for everything, like it explains why he left. Does it? No, but at least now I know there was a reason. That's something, I guess. Patricia looked at the medal. You know what's strange, Detective? I spent my whole life angry at him for abandoning us, and now I find out he was trying to protect us. From himself, from what he'd become. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know, Webb said honestly. Neither do I. Patricia closed the case. They told me he was a hero. They didn't tell me what that cost him, or what it cost us. She looked at Webb. You read the full file, didn't you? There's something they're not saying, something that happened after the bridge. Webb thought about the classified report, about 12 dead soldiers, about the impossible burden Tom Brennan had carried for 7 decades. Yes, she said finally. There's more to the story. Are you going to tell me? I can't. It's classified. Patricia nodded slowly. Was it bad? The thing he did or saw? Yes. Bad enough to destroy a life? Yes. Patricia looked at her father's grave, at the flag flapping in the March wind, at the soldiers standing at attention. Thank you for telling me the truth, even if you couldn't tell me all of it. She turned to leave, then stopped. Detective, do you think he died hating himself? Webb thought about the dog tags clutched in Tom Brennan's frozen hand, about how he'd kept them for 74 years, through everything. A man who hated himself would have thrown them away. But a man who was still trying to be the soldier he'd been, who was still trying to live up to the name stamped on those metal tags, would hold on to them until the very end. "No," Webb said. "I think he died still trying to be the man he was before March 9, 1945. And I think he never forgave himself for failing." "That's almost worse." "Yes, it is." Webb stayed after everyone left, standing in front of Brennan's grave. The headstone was simple. Thomas Arthur Brennan, Master Sergeant, U.S. Army, Medal of Honor, 1922 to 2019. No mention of the bridge. No mention of the 12 dead soldiers. No mention of the decades spent drunk and homeless on America's streets. Just the simple facts. Name, rank, medal, dates. She thought about the Remagen Bridge. It had been captured on March 7, 1945, giving the Allies their first crossing of the Rhine. It collapsed 10 days later, killing 28 American engineers who'd been trying to repair it. The bridge was never rebuilt. The towers still stand on both banks, but the span is gone. It's a museum now, a memorial to one of World War II's most dramatic moments. Tom Brennan had made that moment possible. He'd led the first squad across, cut the demolition wires, saved the bridge. Military historians estimated that capturing Remagen intact shortened the war by several weeks and saved thousands of Allied lives. It was one of the most important tactical victories of the entire European theater. And it destroyed the man who made it happen. Webb wondered what would have happened if the Army had just given Brennan the Medal of Honor in 1945, despite the friendly fire incident. If they'd publicly acknowledged both his heroism and his mistake. If they'd said, "This man did something impossibly brave, and then he made a terrible error in the fog of war. And both of these things are true, and both of these things matter." Would that have helped? Would Brennan have been able to build a life, raise his children, die peacefully in his sleep instead of frozen in a dumpster? She'd never know. None of them would ever know. The Army had made its decision in 1945. Honor the hero, bury the mistake, simplify the story. And Tom Brennan had spent 74 years paying for that decision. As Webb walked back to her car, she thought about all the stories like this. All the veterans carrying impossible burdens that nobody else could see. All the heroes who'd made mistakes. All the simplified narratives that erased the complicated truth. History books would remember Tom Brennan now as the man who captured the Remagen Bridge. His name would be in documentaries and textbooks. The official story would live forever. But Webb would remember the man who died clutching his dog tags behind a Goodwill in Omaha. The man who couldn't escape March 9, 1945. The man who became a ghost because he couldn't live with being both a hero and a killer. That was the real story. And it would stay buried with him. 3 months later, Patricia called Webb. "Detective? It's Patricia Brennan, from Des Moines." Her voice was strained. "The Army sent me a letter about my father's personal effects. Apparently he had a storage unit in Denver, paid up through 2020. They found the rental agreement in his things when they processed his body. I drove out there yesterday." "What did you find?" "Not much. Some old clothes, a duffel bag from the Army, and a metal box." Patricia paused. There was a letter inside, written in 1972, right before he disappeared. "Detective, I think you need to read this. I think you need to understand what really happened to him." 2 days later, a FedEx envelope arrived at Webb's office. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper, typed on an old manual typewriter, dated April 1972. The paper was so fragile it was almost transparent. The letter read, "To whoever finds this, my name is Tom Brennan. I was a soldier in World War II. On March 7, 1945, I led the first squad across the bridge at Remagen, Germany. They wanted to give me a medal for it. They said I was a hero. 2 days later, I killed 12 American soldiers by mistake. They were prisoners who'd escaped and were trying to get home. I thought they were Germans. I was wrong. The army kept it secret. They gave me a different medal and told me never to talk about it. I tried. I tried to live with it. I tried to be normal. I tried to be a husband and a father and a worker and a citizen. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. 12 men. Americans. I was supposed to save Americans, not kill them. I saved thousands by taking the bridge. I killed 12 by making the wrong choice. Which one matters more? I don't know. I've spent 27 years trying to figure it out. The numbers say I came out ahead, saved more than I killed. But math doesn't work like that with human lives. Every one of those 12 men had families, had people who loved them, had futures, and I took all of that away in 30 seconds. I'm going away now. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending I'm okay. I can't keep destroying the people who love me. Maybe if I disappear, they can remember me as I was before Remagen, before I became this. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. That's okay. I've been dead inside since March 1945. This is just making it official. Tell my kids I'm sorry. Tell my ex-wife I'm sorry. Tell the 12 men I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Tom Brennan, March 1972. Webb read the letter 3 times. Then she called Patricia back. I got the letter, Webb said quietly. So now you know. Patricia's voice was thick with tears. Now you understand why he left. Why he couldn't stay. Why he became what he became. Yes. Should I have read it, Detective? Or would it have been better not to know? Webb thought about Tom Brennan's last words on that fragile paper, the raw confession of a man who couldn't live with himself. I think your father wrote that letter because he wanted someone to understand. Maybe not then. Maybe not for 50 years. But eventually. He wanted the truth to exist somewhere, even if he couldn't speak it out loud. Will you tell anyone? About the 12 soldiers? Webb looked at the letter. This was the truth, the real story, the thing that had been buried for 74 years. She thought about Tom Brennan dying alone in Omaha. She thought about Patricia, who'd finally learned why her father couldn't stay. She thought about the 12 dead soldiers and their families, who'd been told a simplified version of how their loved ones died. No, Webb said finally. Some stories are too heavy to share. Your father carried this alone for 74 years. The least I can do is help carry it now. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, Detective. After she hung up, Webb called Colonel Chen. Brennan's daughter found a storage unit in Denver, Webb said. Inside was a letter he wrote in 1972, right before he went AWOL. She sent it to me. What did it say? Webb read him the letter. When she finished, Chen was quiet for a long time. That letter is evidence of classified information, he said finally. Technically, I should confiscate it. Are you going to? No, but I need to ask, what do you plan to do with it? Webb looked at the fragile paper in her hands. This was the truth, the real story, the thing that had been buried for 74 years. She thought about Tom Brennan dying alone in Omaha. She thought about Patricia, who deserved to know why her father left. She thought about the 12 dead soldiers and their families, who'd been told a simplified version of how their loved ones died. I don't know yet, Webb said honestly. Detective, that letter could cause a lot of pain if it becomes public. It could tarnish Brennan's legacy. It could hurt his family. It could reopen wounds that have been closed for decades. Or it could tell the truth. Complicated, ugly truth, but still the truth. Sometimes the truth doesn't help anyone, Chen said quietly. Sometimes, the story is enough. Webb thought about that for a long time after she hung up. She put the letter in her desk drawer, locked it, and went back to work. She had other cases, other bodies, other families looking for answers. But at night sometimes, she thought about Tom Brennan, about the bridge at Remagen, about 12 dead soldiers, about the difference between the story and the truth. She never published the letter, never gave it to the media. Some stories, she decided, were too heavy for anyone else to carry. Sometimes the best thing you could do was just know. Know what really happened. Know who paid the price. Know that history is never as simple as the medals and the monuments make it seem. Tom Brennan captured the Remagen Bridge on March 7, 1945. That's what the history books will say. That's what the Medal of Honor citation says. But Webb knew the rest. She knew about March 9th. She knew about the 12 soldiers. She knew about the decades of guilt and alcoholism and homelessness. She knew about the dog tags clutched in a frozen hand. She knew the real story, and she carried it alone, because that's what Tom Brennan had done for 74 years, and someone had to remember. Someone had to know that being a hero doesn't erase being human, that courage and mistakes can live in the same man, that some wounds never heal, no matter how many lives you save. Detective Sarah Webb decided she would carry that truth. For Tom Brennan, who held on to his dog tags until the very end. For the 12 men who died in the darkness of a German night. For Patricia, who finally understood why her father had to leave. And for every veteran still fighting wars that ended decades ago, carrying burdens no one else can see. That's the real story of the man who captured the Remagen Bridge. Not the one they tell at Medal of Honor ceremonies. Not the one in the history books. The real story is about what it costs to be a hero when you're also human. About guilt that never fades. About the moment when saving thousands can't balance the weight of killing 12. Tom Brennan was both a hero and a killer. Both things were true. Both things mattered. And no medal in the world could make up for the weight of carrying both truths until the day you freeze to death behind a Goodwill in Omaha, alone and forgotten, with nothing but your dog tags and your ghosts.